Welcome, everybody. My name is Sam Enneman in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I will be your host today. This is another webinar in our Teaching with Technology series. Before we do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. And actually, could I get you to just maybe in the text chat, and please make sure that it's set to all participants, if you would just type in what department you're in and where you are logging in from today. So if you have any sound problems, you can click on the audio check button. It should be above the chat. If you have any technical issues with during the session, you can call WebEx support. We've got that toll-free number there, 866-229-3239. And if you need to leave the session temporarily, in the emoticon drop-down menu, if you would just select the coffee cup to let us know that you've just stepped away temporarily. And just a few guidelines. So if you have any questions while we're going along, if you'll just raise your hand, you can ask a question via your microphone, or you are welcome to type in questions and any comments you might have in the chat. I will be monitoring it during the presentation. And finally, we are recording this session, and I will be posting and sending out a link next week. So I would like to introduce our guest presenter today, Justin Cary from the University Writing Program. Justin is a lecturer in that program, and I'm just quoting from his page. Writing works. It can do things. Writing is real, and it has real-world applications in every profession. From a teaching standpoint, I use a wide variety of techniques to help students practice and apply writing. From integrating social media platforms into writing projects, to opening up the course and allowing students to inquire into topics they feel passionate about, my teaching practice is always developing and evolving. And aside from the fact that he loves video games, I've known Justin for a few years now, and I know that if I ever want to get tuned in and connected to what's new in educational technology, I always turn to Justin. So please welcome Justin Cary, who's going to talk to us about podcasting as a writing tool.
Oh, thank you, Sam. That was a great intro, and I'm humbled by that assessment. And likewise, Sam and everyone at the Center for Teaching and Learning have just been such amazing support structures for me at my time at UNC Charlotte. You know, and so thank you. Right back at you, Sam. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone who's here and maybe who's watching at a later date. The goal of this next 30 minutes is to kind of take a quick run through of how to go from concept to podcast in about half an hour. That's about how long it takes to really sort of, you know, hit the ground running and sort of start setting up a podcast, and then maybe have a little discussion about why podcasting is a useful tool in a first-year writing program and beyond. You know, I teach writing in the University Writing Program, and, you know, our number one priority is to help our students become better writers, help them to understand that, you know, they're going to be faced with academic writing challenges, they're going to be faced with other writing challenges in both their university and professional careers. And so, you know, myself and some of my colleagues tried to incorporate a more flexible approach to what writing really is and how we teach it. And so a lot of us bring in different tools and practices to help our students kind of understand the transferable skills and concepts behind the writing that they're doing, so that they can take those skills into other classes. A lot of that has been built into our curriculum as well, as we've been focusing a lot more on student learning outcomes and how we can teach our students things and help them transfer those skills into their other pursuits, both academically and in their careers. And so I've, over the past year and a half or so, really kind of landed on this idea of podcasting as a really fun, interesting, and beneficial way to do that. I first started getting into podcasting about a year and a half ago, just listening to them, having some fun, kind of realizing the potential for them, and then thinking about how we can use them as sort of writing tools in a first-year writing setting. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be walking you through a little bit today. Sam, am I able now to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to. I gave you,
Yes, got it.
Make
Okay,
you the
cool.
presenter.
Great. Okay, so I'd like to begin here. This is the homepage for the University Writing Program. I'm happy to say that I also have the opportunity to be able to administer this site. And so one of the things that I wanted to start with is sort of showing you the end product of what a sort of finished podcast sort of experience looks like. So you can see this on writing.uncc.edu. This has kind of been my pet project for the last year and a half or so, the UWP podcast. And this is kind of what it looks like as it lives on our homepage at the University Writing Program. There's about 8 episodes right now that exist. And these episodes are hosted on SoundCloud and also available through iTunes. And that's some of the things I'm going to be showing you in this presentation. So I wanted to just sort of start off with a brief kind of overview of the end product. And then we're going to kind of switch over to this little graphic that I'd like to start with, which I linked to in the chat of our session. So if you go to the top of our chat area, there's a Google document link there, and you're welcome to follow along. But here is kind of what I wanted to begin with, just a little something that I made to guide us through this. So podcasting is a valuable endeavor that not only offers first-year writing students practice with flexible composing processes, but also gives them transferable skills. Things like planning, critical reading, rhetorical awareness. These are skills that they can practice in a first-year writing setting, apply in academic writing situations throughout their academic career, and then carry with them into their actual careers beyond the university. Podcasts can be created in 5 easy steps. The first step number 1, get a concept. Find a concept. Step number 2, get some basic gear. Step number 3, do a little research. Step number 4, record something with Audacity. And step number 5, edit and publish to iTunes and SoundCloud. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell. And I'm going to walk you through those 5 steps as briefly as I can and sort of take you from initial concept all the way to final podcast. So the first step is finding a concept. And this is an important step. This is before you record anything, before you start to work with audio files or computers or technology. You really just need to think about what you want your podcast to really be. And there's lots of different ways that people have done podcasts. 2 examples of this are NPR. So NPR podcasts kind of look like this, and you can listen to them. I don't know if the sound is going to come through. I don't think it will, but you might want to go check out those and listen to them. Very professionally done. I would characterize NPR podcasts as more formal. Certainly has a less casual tone. And so it kind of has that sort of sheen and that kind of professional polish. And then so if you want your podcast or your students' podcast to be more like that, think about that from a conceptual standpoint before you even start to record anything. What do you want the tone to be? Another example is this. As Sam mentioned, I'm a big gamer. So one of the IGN is a gaming media outlet, and one of their podcast groups is called Nintendo Voice Chat. They've got all of their podcasts actually as videos on YouTube. And so you can sort of see here, this is kind of what a podcasting video setup looks like. And even if you're listening to a podcast just as audio, this is usually how it would look in the studio where that is being recorded. You know, you've got microphones connected to laptops, people sitting around a table talking. So this podcast obviously is much more entertainment focused, much more casual. It's just kind of 4 people talking off the cuff about whatever they want. It's less produced, it's less scripted. So that's kind of the first step. Think about how you want your podcast to look and feel, and if you want your students to create something conceptually before they get started. For the University Writing Program podcast, I kind of based this off of that show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. I don't know if you've ever seen that with Jerry Seinfeld, but I thought that was a really interesting, funny show that kind of deconstructed the talk show interview genre in a really interesting way. And so I wanted my podcast or our program's podcast to be very casual in that way, maybe even somehow incorporate coffee into each episode. I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, but that was kind of my concept going in. It was started off one-on-one conversations, almost like interview style, very informal, just almost like replicating that concept of dropping by someone's office, because I feel like we have our most interesting conversations in the hallway, in a doorway, you know, in between meetings or something. And so I wanted to find a way to capture some of that and share it with ourselves and other people across campus. And so that was the concept of this podcast. So that's step one. Get a concept. Step number two is where you start to think about how am I actually going to accomplish this physically. So gear. There's not much that you need to actually make a podcast. You need a computer, so it could be a laptop, PC, Mac, MacBook Air, whatever you've got. Whatever computer is in your office will be fine too. Or even a cell phone. You don't necessarily, it doesn't have to be a laptop computer. Any device that you have access to that has a microphone in it can be used to start this off. So that's great for students because not everyone will have a microphone-equipped device. That is absolutely true, but a lot of them will, and if they don't, they can share. So it's a good way to kind of have access to these resources. So anything with a microphone. It could be a phone, a tablet, whatever. Those are pretty accessible tools. So a computer with a microphone. If you want to ramp it up just a little bit from that point, then the microphone options get a little more interesting and a lot more expensive, but this is the microphone that I use for my podcast. It's called a Blue Snowball ICE condenser microphone. Condenser mics are a good choice for podcasts. This one's only $40. I use it all the time. It's a great investment. It's the microphone that I use for all of the podcasts that we were just looking at on that website. It records the sound very well, and you can kind of set it up on this little tripod and place it. So, bug your departments to buy you one of these or something like it if you're interested in podcasting for your department with your colleagues or with your students. But there's so many options out there, and there's so many guides that exist online about which microphones to buy and which ones you need for this and that. So, spend some time thinking about that. But that's it. As far as physical gear that you actually need to do this, microphone, computer, done. If you don't want to get the microphone, just use your phone. It works exactly the same way. You just need something with a mic. From there, once you've got your basic tools, I put in here, do some research. And so what I mean by that is go listen to podcasts. Go listen to what people are doing in the podcast sphere. Listen to, take a look at how podcasts look and feel, kind of learn the genre. I try to teach my students that all the time and sort of have, what is the genre here? How can we learn it? And why is that important? And so a great place to do that is to go to iTunes. iTunes is a great repository, probably the biggest and best repository of podcasts. This is the podcast section of the iTunes store. And as you can see, there are podcasts for everyone and anyone about anything you could possibly be interested in. Some of the top ones are featured here, like Milk Street Radio. This appears to be some sort of food-based podcast. Serial Killers. I think that's a really popular one. I haven't listened to that. Let's Not Panic, Criminal, The Journal. And there's categories and there's top episodes and there's just so much content here. Sports, politics, drama, cars, everything and anything. So listen to some of these and see how these folks are doing this and kind of what they're doing and try to mimic that a little bit. Try to make your sound the way that these sort of more professional ones sound. I think that's very important, is trying to achieve that level of professionality. So do some research. And then after that point, it's time to start actually recording. And I would recommend just kind of diving into this and play with it. Playing with it is really important. And so how do we do this? You got your mic and you got your computer. Let's just say we are using that mic from Amazon I was just showing you, right, this one. I plugged that right into my computer like this, right? Here's a picture of the mic plugged into my MacBook, right? And then I open up a program that I've downloaded from the internet that is completely free and is excellent for podcasting, and that program is called Audacity. And this is what Audacity looks like. All right, so Audacity, one sec, okay. I'm just kind of setting something up here to show you. So Audacity is a free audio recording program that you can download from the internet. It looks like this, and this is where your composing will happen. This is kind of where the first year writing stuff comes into play with sound recording. Playing around with a sound file and composing something in audio is very, very similar to how we compose something in writing. The process is very similar. You kind of throw something out there that is very rough and needs editing. You put it into this this program, this interface, and then you start to shape it and reshape it and edit it and try it out and test things. And it's very similar to the writing process. We're just using a different medium. And so I love to help my students make those connections and sort of see that this process of composing is exactly the same process of composing that you've been doing all this time with your essays. We're just doing it now in a different medium. And so they really kind of, they hone in on that, and they really seem to enjoy that process. So this is Audacity, and I'm just going to import a sound file into this just to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to go to import audio, see if I can find a sound file here, just something. I thought I had a recording of my own voice that I was just using, but I don't think it saves properly. So I'm just going to try to find, I'll just go in and grab some music here. So this is what a sound file looks like in Audacity, right? It's kind of a cool way to think about audio. You don't often see it in visual terms, but this is what audio looks like visually. And again, it's another interesting comparison, right? We are so used to reading text in an essay, for example, visually, but we aren't very often used to seeing audio visually. And so it's kind of a cool thing to look at it in this kind of way. And so you can kind of scroll through here. And again, I don't know if the sound from my interface here is coming through to the presentation, but you know, you can listen to this track, you can click around through it in different places, you can see the highs and the lows, like this is a loud point, these blue lines go way up, and right here is kind of a more quieter moment in the track because the lines don't go very high. And so you can highlight bits of this, you can, you know, delete and remove sections of the sound if you don't want to use it, you know, you can cut things, you can copy things. So if you wanted to make a copy of this and move it down to like the next section, you can do that. There's all sorts of different ways that you can manipulate these sound files, edit them, rearrange them, remix them. You can like one of the things that one of the little techniques that I often do is I create an intro for my podcasts, right? A little quick audio intro. And so I use this drag tool and I drag my sound file kind of down here a little ways, maybe 15 seconds. And then I'll go to somewhere such as the free music, oops. I'll go to the free music archive, find an interesting track that is free to use, and I will download it. I'm not going to wait that whole time for that file to finish down. Oh, it's only 2 seconds. But so then I'll download that file, and then I will put it here kind of right at the beginning of the Audacity track to create sort of an intro piece to that audio, to that speaking podcast, because that is something that I found in my research, right? In listening to other podcasts, one of the things I noticed all the time was most of them had this sort of little musical intro that kind of set the tone and stage for the rest of the podcast. So again, keeping with that sort of genre mimicry, I wanted my podcast to sound professional in that way. So Audacity, and again, I'm going really quick through this, but you can always go back and watch this again. And like I said, there's so many guides online. That's how I learned how to do this. I just went to Google and I said, hey, how do I make a professional sounding podcast? And I watched some videos and read some articles. I'll show you two other more specific things really quick in Audacity because I think they're really important. I really wanted my podcast to sound professional. That was very important to me in my concept for what I wanted them to sound like. I wanted to sound like an NPR podcast, and so I did a little research. I don't know much about sound design, but or sound like engineering, but I did learn a few tricks. So in Audacity, you can add all these effects to your sounds, and there's two in here that are very important for podcasters. The first one is compression. Don't ask me what this chart means. I don't really know. I don't know what any of these numbers really indicate. My brother is a sound engineer. He actually knows what all this means. But the one thing I did learn is that this first bar here, this idea of this threshold decibel, if you kind of make this around -15 to -12-ish, kind of where it already is, this will help even out those loud like moments in an audio recording where if you ever listen to an audio recording and someone like all of a sudden says something really loud and it kind of crackles at the top of that sound and it kind of makes that kind of, you know, jarring kind of noise in your ear, changing the compression level will account for some of that, and it'll help to equal out that sound so that it's not too high when someone like, you know, says something surprisingly, you know, says something that's too loud. So you can just click OK, and you can see it'll apply this effect. And then you can see the visual representation of the sound file actually change a little bit. So that's kind of neat. You can kind of look at how those things actually change visually. And the second effect tool is just in here in the equalization. It looks like they've changed this a little bit. So again, the graphs scare me because I'm not really a math guy, but like this little blue line in the middle represents sort of the low and high end decibel levels, I guess, or the frequencies at which the sound file is actually happening, and you can manipulate this a little bit. So if you turn the high end up a little bit, like this, and you turn the low end up a little bit like this, and kind of make this little U curve kind of going on here, and you're going to get that sort of shape, that is going to make the sound in the podcast sound much more even and much more like professional sounding. I know that's kind of a vague description, but it'll make it sound more like an NPR podcast. So these two effects, compression and equalization, are very important when you're dealing just with voice, because voices can be all over the place in terms of sounds and frequencies. So if you just tweak those two little things quickly, it really kind of adds a little extra level of shimmer and shine to your podcast and really makes it nice. Audacity has a lot more tools than just those that you can play around with, but I don't have time to kind of go into all of them. And I'm still learning a lot of these tools, so I'm always open to learning more. So if anyone else knows more about Audacity, I'd love to have a conversation about it. When you're finished, editing and recording and playing around with your sound files, you can simply export this audio and you save it as a file on your desktop or wherever you want to save it at. And then you have an audio file, an MP3 or an MP4 from Audacity that you can then publish to the internet. Now, this is kind of where it gets a little confusing, kind of. So let's say you've got a finished podcast, right? You've done all of these steps, right? You've recorded. What do you do now? And this is the part that I had to research a little bit. So I wanted my podcast to be like legit, right? I wanted it to be on iTunes because I felt like iTunes was a legitimate place where people would go to find and listen to podcasts. And so anyone can submit a podcast that they've created to iTunes. There is kind of a process that you have to go through to do that, and I've got a link to it here. Again, you can just Google how to submit a podcast to iTunes, and there's lots of different sites that give you directions, and you can just read through this. These are just pretty simple directions, but there are some weird little things like it'll ask you to, include an artwork, like a picture to go with your podcast that is these exact dimensions, or it won't accept your submission. So there's some really weird little situational, rhetorical kind of moves you have to make. So just adhere to these genre conventions as you are submitting. But the tricky part is you can't actually submit like a file from Audacity to iTunes for your podcast, and that might sound confusing. So if you download a file from Audacity that you just got finished recording and you wanted to put that onto iTunes, you can't, because iTunes does not host sound files in that same way. They will not host your files. So what you have to do is you have to find another website that exists online that will kind of house your files, that will allow you to host whatever files you record on their servers, because iTunes doesn't do that. The best one I found for that is called SoundCloud. SoundCloud is a free service up to a certain point. You're allowed to upload a certain number of gigabytes or megabytes of data before you have to start paying. So I have uploaded the Audacity MP4 files that I've recorded for the University Writing Program podcast to SoundCloud. And then I'm able to take this sort of SoundCloud-hosted site, these files, and submit them to iTunes. And so through that process, when I upload a new file to SoundCloud, it automatically populates that new episode of my podcast into iTunes. So I don't have to really do much else with iTunes beyond that initial submission process. I just have to upload my content to SoundCloud. So I've got all of my podcast episodes here on SoundCloud, and then I've embedded them onto our University Writing Program website as our final product. And this is the end result. This is kind of what a podcast might look like if you wanted to do this for, let's say, a student portfolio as part of their project. They could simply embed their podcast onto a website like this, or you could do one for your department and embed it onto your department's website like this. As you can see, it kind of lists the number of listens. That's a nice feature. So I guess this one about genre remix and dub smash, that has 51 listens, so that's our most popular episode. And that's it. That's the basic general overview. I know that was really quick, and 30 minutes isn't quite enough time to kind of go through all the nuances, but that's the basic idea. It really doesn't take much. You sit down in front of a microphone, you have something that you want to talk about, you record it, you mess with the settings a little bit, download that file, host it somewhere, put it on iTunes, and you're done. I mean, you have a podcast. This did not take long. So kind of coming back to this initial idea, right? I really believe that, you know, our number one charge, of course, is to help students become better writers and to become more successful in the academic writing situations that they're going to find themselves in over the next 4 years. A first-year writing program, that's the number one goal. But if we can also offer our students flexible strategies for composing in spaces beyond just an academic essay, I truly believe, as does most of the program, that those skills will transfer into different situations for students. So they may not be making a podcast in their career, but they might have to kind of approach a challenge or a task or a goal like this. You know, an employer might say, I need you to make me something. And they can use some of these sort of skills that they might remember from school or from doing something like a podcast about how they went out and kind of learned how to do it, how they, you know, wanted it to seem a little more professional, and so they took this extra step. So I really truly believe that doing something like this can help students, you know, think about their writing in a different way, think about it in a more practical way, and really kind of have some fun too. This is a fun project that we do in class. So yeah, that was kind of a quick rundown of all of the different kind of podcast things that I incorporate, and I'd love to have just the last couple of minutes here be questions or discussion if I can find my way back to the actual WebEx interface. There we go. Yeah, so I would love any questions, comments, or any materials you'd like me to send via the chat. Let me know, and I'd be happy to for the next 3 minutes. Thanks.
So I don't know. It doesn't look like there are any questions right now. So thank you, Justin, for a very wonderful presentation.
My pleasure.
It may have inspired me to go back to picking up the CTL podcast that we used to do once upon a time.
There you go. Podcasts are pretty hip. They're in, I think. They're hip right now. So yeah.
That's right. Podcasting is not dead.
No way. Definitely not.
So before we wrap up, I'd just like to point out some upcoming webinars that we have, in case you're interested this month. So on the 14th, we have another in our series on teaching online. This one is on enhancing interaction in your online courses, delivered by Florence Martin in the Instructional Systems Technology program. Then on the 16th, we have our very own Kiran Budrani, who will be delivering a webinar on designing beautiful course navigation buttons in Canvas. So if you've ever wondered how to do that, come and listen to Kiran. And then finally, on the 24th, we have another in our series from the Student's Pathway to Success, a faculty guide, which was an e-book that a group of top 40 faculty wrote 2 years ago. And on the 24th, two of the authors will be highlighting a chapter on learning how to learn. So again, thank you all for coming, and I know we're right around lunchtime, so I want to leave everybody with a virtual dessert. So if you would, just maybe type into chat which is your favorite dessert, and I'll put in mine. And so again, just thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at another CTL webinar.
Thanks, Sam.